Well, hey there, everybody. It's been a little bit of time now, hasn't it? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Bill Woodcock, and you are watching or listening to another edition of But Before We Go, the podcast by Gen X, about Gen X, for everybody. So today begins the third season of But Before We Go. The second season was truncated all too abruptly. What happened? So, a number of things happened. First off, anybody looking for personal drama or any salacious tidbits and details, you're not going to get them. In fact, what you're going to get in this podcast going forward is going to be a whole lot of real life. But more on that to come. But those of you who have been following the podcast and my own podcast journey over the past several years know that I normally appear with a tag team partner, my very good friend Steve Hunt. Um, I've decided to go the rest of the journey on this podcast alone. And that's certainly not anything negative about Steve. Remains a great friend. He's a terrific co-host. He's lent a lot of insights to the show. But at the end of the day, this is my intellectual property and my responsibility. And I want to say more of the things that I want to say and more of the things that I want to talk about. So call me selfish, and I probably am. And I'm not saying Steve will never be involved again. Very likely he will. But this is a burden that is mine. And by burden, I mean a great joy. And I think that gets me to the greater thing of what I want to talk about and why I feel like this particular podcast journey is one I need to continue to take alone. Um, having a podcast about the wonderful experience that we're having as Gen Xers, um, you know, it's that thing about Gen X that we are wildly individualistic, but also we are unified in our individualistic concerns and attitudes towards a lot of things. Um, we are the feral generation. We are the people who were raised on hose water and neglect. And we're damn proud of that. And we're going to tell our story. And each and every last one of us thinks that each and every last one of us, are the very best person in order to tell that story. And what I want to communicate is that no, we're not alone. And, the things that we've thought of, the things that we've believed, the things that we've valued, they have been for higher purpose. They have been great things. If it was not for Gen X, I mean, there wouldn't be any millennial generation, and there sure as hell would not have been a Gen Z. And by that, I don't just mean biologically, there wouldn't have been a millennial generation or a Gen Z. I mean that Gen X saw and sees the way the world is as has been left it by the boomers, the silent generations, and we're like, oh no, that's not us. We are going to chart our own path. And as teenagers and as young adults, we love those choose your own adventure books. We've decided to choose our own adventure. And who's to say whether or not, as a generation, we have spent our time on this planet well? First off, there's a whole lot of book that has to be written about Gen X. The oldest Gen Xers are only 60. I'm a couple years from being at the early age of the Gen X generation. I'll be 58 shortly. And so I know people who are early 50s, late 40s, mid 40s. Gen X goes up to 1980, so current 45-year-olds. Gen X takes up a wide swath. So, most of us are still in fact, we all are still in prime earning years, prime power years, prime family years. We're seeing children go off and get married. We're saying hello to our first grandchildren. Some of us have more than one grandchild, and that is all a wonderful thing. And so our book is yet to be written. But this is a first attempt at writing it. And this is my perspective. You know, I am of the opinion that we are leaving the world a better place than how we found it, and that we have done so at the expense of our bank accounts, of, you know, um, having, for example, a Gen X president. Most other Western nations have had at least one Gen X era leader. The United States is not. Um, and that, we are leaving a legacy um, for our generations to come. The millennials, the Zs, the alphas, and I don't know if there's anyone else out there, but there will be something else. My guess, they're going to be called the betas, which, oh God, that's going to start a whole other thing. So then, how does that relate to this podcast? Well, as ruggedly, singularly individualistic as Gen X is, so I find must be this podcast. This has to be my voice. This has to be my opinion. These have to be my idle, if not insane musings. That's not to say there's not going to be a lot of this stuff that's not going to be well shared. And that's not to say we'll never have guests or co-hosts or whatever else. That's not to say we're not going to have a hearty debate and discussion between, members of the greatest generation of all, Generation X. Hell, we may even debate a millennial or a Z or two while we're at it. But by and large, this is going to be my subject matter. These are going to be my thoughts, my opinions. Take with them what you will, and take what you like and leave the rest. And I hope that you're going to like a lot. I've written a book on the whole Gen X experience as it relates to technology. I'm writing another book on Saturday morning cartoons, which was a staple of Gen X life. And there will be more books to come, you know? Um, But I do believe that this podcast will take on a little bit more serious matter than maybe what Steve and I did before about what it was like growing up Gen X. Growing up Gen X was not necessarily all about, you know, being the first generation to muck around with PCs and the generation of latchkey kids. Not everything about growing up Gen X was peaches and cream. There was a lot of whacked out shit to be growing up Gen X. And we had to find our way through it. We had to find our way through being latchkey kids, and we did that on our own. We had to find our way through being neglected, and we found that way on our own. We were, the first generation in which child abuse became an issue of national visibility, and we had to go through that on our own. So yeah, we're going to be talking about funny stuff. We're going to be talking about, you know, black and white TV to color console TV to VHS to DVD to flat screens and Blu-rays and, video discs and all that nonsense. All that weird technology, all that weird stuff, how how you couldn't, a world before DoorDash, a world before social media, a world before email, A world before cell phones. Who can imagine such a thing? So we're going to talk about all that and reminisce about all that. We're going to have a lot of fun doing it. We're also going to talk about a lot of other neat stuff and maybe a lot of stuff that's maybe a little bit difficult to remember. Maybe it wasn't your experience out there in Gen X land, but I'll bet you that it probably happened to, if not you, then people you know. And maybe we'll all learn a little. And if by learning a little, we all have a realization that, you know what, we all came through that shit together, that's good. If we all believe and if we all hold true that there's more in common between us than what separates us, that's good. And if through sharing my experience, that may help somebody understand their own or another person's, that's good too. So that's what But Before We Go is going to be about going forward. It's about living the Gen X experience in all of its forms, the good, the bad, and the ugly, warts and all. Those things that thrilled us, those things that made us angry, those things that we were scared of, those things that, you know, that, we held dear. And, think of those things as how they shaped us, good and bad. So that's where we're going to be going forward. So I hope you decide to join me on this. The episodes are going to be a little bit shorter. They're going to be a little bit more expository. You can think of them as a column of what it was like to grow up Gen X. A column brought to you through the courtesy and the technology of your very own device. Brought to you live or semi live every week or thereabouts. So, at this, I close. I look forward to our next episode where we shall talk about fireworks. We just had the 4th of July here in the US. Cool holiday here. As always, any holiday where it's a chance for me to eat is a cool one. So that means all of them. But fireworks, we grew up afraid of fireworks, at least I did. And maybe you did too. But why? And what about fireworks today? What's changed? Well, we're going to talk about that and much more on the next episode of But Before We Go. So until then, my name is Bill Woodcock. I hope you have had a wonderful day. Take care, everybody.